Welcome, everybody. My name is Raj Pagadala, and I'd like to thank you all for taking the time of your day to attend this webinar. I hope that at the end of this presentation, you would have felt that it was worth your time and you learned something new. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my host, the Virginia Commonwealth University's Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Employment of People with Physical Disabilities, for inviting me to present to you all. Like I said, my name is Raj Pagadala. I am a rehabilitation engineer by training, and I got my master's in biomedical engineering from Louisiana Tech University. And I specialized in rehabilitation engineering, and I've been in this field for over 23 years now. I'm a member of the Rehabilitation Engineering and Assistive Technology Society of North America, or RESNA, and I am currently sitting on their board of directors. I'm also a RESNA certified assistive technology practitioner. I am currently employed with the Georgia Vocational Rehab Agency and I'm the director of the Assistive Technology Program. We have a team of 20 assistive technology specialists on the team. There are 4 rehabilitation engineers, 4 occupational therapists, and 12 rehab technologists. So I'm going to be talking to you today about 5 case studies, which I hope you'll find interesting. The first one is a gentleman with Friedreich's ataxia who was employed in a fast food restaurant as a cashier. The second is a gentleman with a spinal cord injury who was also working as a cashier but for a variety store. The third case is a gentleman who was graduating from college and was going to become a high school teacher where he was going to be teaching math and physics. The fourth case is a lady with low vision who was working as an administrative assistant. And the final case is also a low vision case. And this is a lady who was working at a supermarket, working as a greeting card merchandiser. So in the first case study, the rehab engineer and technologists on the team were Scott Barr and Wayne Amons. And this is a 21-year-old gentleman with Friedreich's ataxia. And so he had weakness in his upper and lower extremities, and he needed to use a manual wheelchair. He had found a job at a local fast food restaurant where he was going to be working out of the drive-through window. Typically in these restaurants you have 2 windows. The first window is where the customer pays the money and then drives to the second window and then picks up their food. So the client was assigned to the first window where his responsibilities were primarily to take the money or credit card from the customer and then complete the transaction. So as you can see on the screen, this is a typical image of most fast food restaurants. And as you can tell, the people working here are typically stand and work. So the problem is that the client was sitting in a manual wheelchair and therefore the window was too high, and also he could not access the cash register. So the barriers in the workplace that we had to deal with was to modify the workplace so that the customer could be in a position where he had direct interaction and eye contact with the customers in the drive-through window and could also operate the cash register. The employer actually had come up with an accommodation for the client, and the accommodation was fabricating a box with particle board. And the way the client got on top was that his co-workers would actually lift the wheelchair with the client in the wheelchair and place him on the board or the box. There were some risk factors here. One was that the client was in danger of being dropped and would hurt himself. It was also a risk to the co-workers who were trying to carry the client in the chair, and they were at risk of getting hurt themselves. And of course, the employer was risking a workers' comp case that was just a matter of time before it would happen. So when Scott and Wayne came to see the client and looked at what was going on, there were a couple of modifications that they had considered. One was getting a wheelchair with an elevating seat that would rise the client up to where he could see the customers. and the other option was coming up, recommending a standing wheelchair where he could get from a sit to stand position. The modifications would cost at the least $5,000 and maybe more. But of course, with vocational rehab, it is not the cost that's a criteria or a priority. We look at the accommodation that works best for not only the client but also the employer. So the problem with both these potential solutions were that the client had no means of transporting the power chair back home. He primarily used a manual wheelchair. So the only reason he would have used a wheelchair that could either have an elevating seat or was a standing wheelchair was to be working. There was also limited storage space in the restaurant, so there was nowhere to store this either. So it was really not a feasible solution. So they looked at fabricating something different that would accommodate not only the needs of the client, but it would be an universal design so that when the client finished his shift, the other employees, the next employee could also use that accommodation, and therefore the accommodation would become a part of the workplace and did not require it to be removed once the client was done. So they looked at getting a raised platform lift for the client. They found this product from a company that provided platform lifts, and this is hydraulically powered, and it's very simple to use. There are just two switches that you see at the top left corner of the screen. It's just an up and a down switch, and what you see is the platform lift in its lowered position, and if you hit the up button, it goes up to whatever desired height you need to raise it to. They also got the frame of the seating part of a manual wheelchair donated by a nonprofit in Atlanta that was going to be a part of the accommodation so that the client could sit on top. And in that image, you see one of the trials that they did with these pieces. So the things that they had to also address was to make sure that the surface of the platform had a non-skid surface. And they also had to make sure that the seat was well secured to the platform frame. And as an added security measure, they wanted to make sure that the platform lift itself was secured to the ground, so that way there was no risk of falling down or toppling over. And actually, you could see that metal shaft at the bottom. There are two pieces, one on either side. And what you don't see in the picture is a couple of other metal strips that go perpendicular on either side. And that is bolted to the floor of the restaurant and holds this whole yellow platform in place. And this is just an image of a self-adhesive skid-proof mat that they stuck onto the surface. And Wayne and Scott had to fabricate some additional components to make sure that the chair and the platform lift were secured. And so on the top left corner of the picture, you see these two metal rods, and I had pointed that out to you in the previous picture. And these are the other components. They form a rectangle and they're bolted down to the floor of the restaurant. Now you also see in the picture a couple of bars in the yellow rectangle and a couple of brackets in the red circle. I've just magnified it for you to get a better idea of what they are, but these were fabricated in our shop. And these brackets actually are bolted to underneath the platform, and you see the bar in the lower part of the screen with these legs. These actually fit into the brackets. So the next picture shows the bracket bolted, and this is a pin that holds the shaft that goes down here in place. And the next picture will give you a better idea of what this is about. So the bar with the legs actually they have, where you see the red circle, there are actually holes that have been drilled on this platform surface, and these legs go through down. And if I could go back, they're held in place with the pin. So that bolt has nowhere to go, the bar has nowhere to go. And the seat then sits on top of that bar, and then above that is the second bar that is put on top, and in the green triangle you see a bolt going down, this one on either side, and that basically clamps onto the seat. So that way you have two bars that are grabbing the chair, and so it is going to be secure when someone is sitting on it. This is just a picture of the chair that's secured to the platform, and from a different angle you see that there are leg rests attached here so that the feet are not dangling. This is an image of the client on the platform left on the chair, and the way he gets on to that is that when the lift is in its lowest lowered position, the client will roll next to it, take these armrests off, and then do a lateral transfer independently, and then he'd put the armrest back and hit the up button, and then he would go up into the position that he needed to be to interact with his customers. We also got him a keyboard arm so that the keyboard could be positioned ergonomically. And as you could see in this picture, he's got no problems talking to his customers and getting the money from them and providing change. And the keyboard is right in front of him. And the gentleman to the right of the image is Wayne. He's holding the cash register, and we were looking at what would be the best position to keep the cash register so that the client could access the money in it. They purchased a retractable tray for the keyboard and for the cash register, and bolted it to the table here. And as you could see here, the client is making change by pulling the drawer out. And once again, you could tell that he has no problems working at this station. So the the cost of the platform lift was a little over $2,000. The other parts and fabrication material cost another approximately $150. In total, this modification was under $2,500. As I mentioned earlier, the wheelchair frame was donated by a nonprofit in Atlanta called FODAC, Friends of Disabled Adults and Children. The total cost of this modification was half of what it would have cost us to get an elevating wheelchair. And the nice thing about this was that it was something that everybody in the working in the restaurant could use, and therefore there was no need to take it and store it somewhere else or transport it out of the building. It just became a part of the workplace. And the company was also looking at that point to hire more people with disabilities. The next case that I want to talk to you about is a gentleman who was 38 years old at that time. He had a high school education, and he was living in South Georgia, in a very rural part of the state. He had a T4 spinal cord injury and was a paraplegic, and therefore he was not able to use his lower extremities. But because he had such a low disability at a lower part of his spine, he had good upper extremity control and trunk control. He used a manual wheelchair, and he drove a pickup with hand controls, and the pickup also had a manual chair lift. So that was nice because in rural Georgia, public transportation is limited, if not non-existent. Vocational evaluation with the client matched him for customer service work, and the employment specialist found a job as a cashier at a variety store in the town that he lived in. And the name of the company is Alco, and the location was Nashville, Georgia, which is an hour north of the Florida-Georgia border. So the strengths in this case was that not only the client had transportation, but more importantly, we had an employer who was willing to do whatever it took to accommodate the client. So the only barrier in this whole situation of getting the client to start working was that the workstation was designed for somebody to work in a standing position. So here is a picture of the cash register. It's typical of what you see in a supermarket or a grocery store or a pharmacy. And as most of us know that people who are checking us out are standing when they do their jobs. The client was using a quickie manual chair. So when we had him pull into the workstation, we immediately recognized that one of the limitations was that because it was a manual chair, there was a significant height difference between where he sat and where the countertop, the top of the workstation counter was. So we knew that we had to address the height difference. And we had actually looked at probably putting a ramp or some kind of a lift, but because of the space constraints, we felt that that was not the best solution, and that it was probably worth actually getting him a different chair that would accommodate him in that place. And lucky for us, we didn't have to spend any money on a power chair, because we had in our surplus a jazzy power chair with that had an adjustable height seat that we could transfer to this client. But the problem was, like in the first case, it was too big to transport. Remember, the client uses a manual wheelchair and has a manual wheelchair lift, but this is simply too heavy to be transported out. But unlike the previous case, this particular store had plenty of storage space, and therefore the manager was more than willing to let the chair be stored in the back of the store when the client was not using it. The second problem that we had to tackle was that if you see in this picture, the two edges meet at this point and it's jutting out. So when the client rolled in under the workstation, we knew that he was going to hit, the footplate was going to hit this edge here, and that he would not be able to get too close to the workstation. So we had to address the footplate as being a barrier. And the simplest solution we felt was to replace the footplate with swing away footplates. So this is just a stock image of the Jazzy power chair with a solid footplate. And what we got here is the swing away footplates. You see the gap there, and it's stored in the back, and you see that there is plenty of place for us to store the power chair. So here's the chair in its lowered position, and this is the chair in its elevated position, and the height difference was what the client, just enough for the client to work functionally at the cash register. And I just took this picture to simulate what the footplate would have looked like when the original footplate looked like versus the swing away footplates that we had. And the client had the ability to just move his feet apart so that the gap would increase and he could slide in under the workstation. And you could see that in this picture, that with the swing away footplates, there's absolutely no problem. The third issue that we had to deal with this place, with the work site, was that when trying to use the keyboard, and here Scott Harris, the client, is sitting in the power chair, that when he tried to operate the keyboard, he had to raise his arms and extend it out. It's okay to do that once or twice, but if you work there an entire shift, pretty soon your wrists, shoulders, and your elbows are going to be tired. So it's really not ergonomic. So what we had to do is also look at probably repositioning the keyboard. The fourth concern was the touchscreen monitor. Now, this touchscreen monitor is used extensively because it makes you work faster and was an integral part of the workplace. But when Scott tried to reach it, he had to lean forward and even then could not reach out and touch the monitor. So we knew that we had to address relocating the monitor too. And over there, we had Scott try to reach the printer for the receipts. As we all know, when a transaction is complete, the cashier has to hand the customer the receipt. Now Scott could barely reach and touch the paper there, but if he tried to rip it off, there was always the possibility that he may stumble out of his chair and fall forward. So we knew that we had to address relocating the printer also. And finally, once in a while, they have to use the telephone either to call the supervisor for a price check or get some help to locate an item in the store. And the only thing that Scott could do was point at the telephone. So the sixth thing that we had to do was to address the where the telephone had to be relocated to. And the other thing that I felt in this case was that it would be efficient for us to find a way to extend the work surface of the counter, and to provide additional stability to the client. And you will see in subsequent pictures how that comes in handy. But at the right corner here is Bill Barnes. He's the rehab engineer who worked on this case. So the seventh thing that we wanted to address with this particular workstation was to increase the area of the counter. Excuse me. So this is the image of the workstation, the cash register, and one of the things that we wanted to use in the design of this worksite modification was that we wanted to design it in such a way that it didn't seem retrofitted. We didn't want a customer walking into the store to do a double take and see that there's something different about this particular workstation. We wanted it to blend in. The other thing is that, we were always wanting to make this workstation designed in such a way that if for whatever reason Scott decided not to work here or he found another job, we wanted to give the employer an opportunity to revert back to the original specifications of the cash register. And so we wanted to make sure that it could be dismantled easily, and we really didn't want any permanent damage to the workstation where we had to drill holes to mount any of the modifications. So while brainstorming with different ways to do this, Bill came up with this design. It's pretty cool, actually. So this is what you see is the keyboard tray that was the final part of our design. The keyboard sits in this rectangle area here, the white rectangle, and we have these extensions, and we have a couple of wings on either side. And actually, the computer of the touchscreen that goes along with the touchscreen monitor sits on top of on the wings. So the weight is it's pretty heavy, and it's the weight of that computer that actually holds the keyboard tray in place, and that's sufficient to counter the weight of the keyboard and the forces from typing on it. And so therefore this design was such that there was no need to screw or bolt the keyboard to the workstation. We did some rapid fabrication using insulation foam, and what you see are two different angles of the keyboard tray and the base on which the phone was going to be mounted. So we had to make sure that this was done right, so we just worked with foam board to make sure that the dimensions were going to work. So here's an image, a couple of images of the foam board, the models in position, and so where you can see where the keyboard is, and that was where we decided it was the ideal position for the telephone. So this is a picture from a side-on picture of the workstation before the modifications, and some of the components that we had to modify were the keyboard, the monitor, the telephone, and the printer. And the next shot is that of the workstation after the modifications were completed, and you could see that everything is moved forward. So the keyboard is down here, and that blue rectangle or trapezoid is where the keyboard used to be. And that's the outline of the monitor where it used to be, and you could see in the picture that it's moved forward. The telephone used to be mounted on that pole in the back, but right now it's right on the right side of the monitor. The keyboard outline is on the green and you could see that it used to be located on the left side of the workstation, and right now it's located right next to the monitor, next to the Advil advertisement sign that you see there. And this is the picture of the workstation before the modification from the opposite side, and this is the before, and the keyboard, monitor, telephone, and the printer. And this is after, and you see everything's once again moved forward, and that's where the printer used to be, the telephone, the keyboard, and the monitor. Now, remember I told you that we felt that we had to increase the surface area of the workstation, and so that was how the end product would look like. And Bill once again thought about ways to model something that would require minimum mounting and easy and it would be easy for the employer to dismantle if that was what was required later on. So he came up with this two-piece contraption, and the bottom piece has a couple of clamps which hold that particular piece to the work surface under the counter, and this piece goes on top. And the way this is designed is these two clamps hold them in place. This additional piece goes on top, and if you apply pressure on this, this goes in the opposite direction, but it's held in place because it's under the counter and the table surface pushes it down, and therefore it is in place. And once again, this is held only by these two clamps. So once again, we used insulation board for rapid fabrication. So that piece goes underneath, and the work surface is extended when the second piece goes on top. So that's the final product. I did fail to mention that the material used here was called King Starboard. It's a marine grade high density polyurethane product, polyethylene product that comes in different colors. And so that's the piece clamped to the bottom of the countertop, and this is a view from the bottom. So only thing that holds this in place are those two clamps, and you see that when force is applied downward here, this piece counteracts the downward force and holds it in position. So this is an image of before from a front-on position, and this is the after picture once the modifications were in place. Now this is once again before a close-up shot, and you will see that in the next picture everything comes forward. So that's Scott in his power chair at the workstation, and you could see that he's sitting pretty comfortably, and the power chair has him sitting at the right height, and he's already using that extension of the counter for supporting his right arm. So here he is using the keyboard, and you could see that it is it's pretty ergonomic. He's sitting there like you and I would be sitting at our office desk. Before, as you could notice and recall, he had to extend his hand in order to use it, but over here he's very comfortably placed. This is a picture of him actually palming the touchscreen monitor. He could actually access any part of the monitor screen. Before, even when he was trying to lean forward, he could not access the monitor, but in the after picture you could see how comfortably positioned the monitor is with respect to his reach. And that's Scott picking up the phone, and it's within arm's reach. He doesn't even need to extend his hand. And in the before picture, the only thing that he could do was to point at the telephone mounted on the pole. And here he is leaning forward to grip the receipt from the printer, and once again you could see that he is actually resting his arm on that extension of the counter extension, and he can very easily hand the customer the receipt. Before, as I mentioned, he had to lean forward, and there was always the risk that he may fall out of his chair while trying to rip the paper out. But right now he's going nowhere because he's secure in his chair, and with the counter extension giving him additional support. And this printer could actually have been moved a little more closer if Scott felt that was the right position, but he was fine with this the positioning of the printer at that point. So here is Scott scanning a few items of merchandise and bagging them and handing it to the customer. One of the things that we advised Scott to do is not to put too many items in the bag. That way it's light enough for him to pick it up. And that's a picture of Scott with his manager. And so as far as the cost, the materials cost under $500. the client, when we did a follow-up with the client, he said that he was doing well, and he started working part-time, and he was looking to work additional hours. He described the workstation as a perfect modification for him. So actually, when I went back and was talking to one of his co-workers and asked her what she thought about the workstation, she said that she wished that they would allow her to work from the workstation that Scott works out of, because she could pull up a bar stool or a high chair and sit and work. So apparently, whenever Scott's shift was done, that was the most popular workstation. And then the really cool part of the story is that Scott lives in a very small town, and word gets around pretty easily. So when the people in the church and the community found out that the company had worked very closely in order to try to make sure that Scott had a job and was independent, they showed their support to the store by bringing their business to the store, and which obviously made the manager very happy. And as you could see from the modifications that we made here, we made sure that the elements were blended in with the natural environment of the work area. And if you walked into the store, unless you're looking for it, chances are that you would not recognize that the place was the workstation, the cash register was actually modified. And we also wanted to give the flexibility to the employer to take out the modifications if such a need arose. So all in all, this was a pretty successful case, and the regional director of ALCO actually wanted to work with us some more to see if we could modify a few more cash registers in the other stores that they had in the state, because they were interested in wanting to hire more people with disabilities too. So this was a win-win situation for everybody. The third case that I want to talk to you about today is a gentleman, a college student, soon to graduate college student, who had arthrogryposis, which resulted in his the shortening of the muscles, because of which he had limited extension and flexion in the joints that were impacted. He was going to the University of Georgia and was an education major, and was hoping to become a math teacher and also teach physics at the local schools after he graduated. As a part of his requirement to complete his degree, he had to do a 6-month student teaching internship. He wanted to do it the previous semester, but the problem was that because the school where he was assigned to did not have accommodations, he had to drop out. And now time was of the essence, and we had to do something right now if he had to graduate on time and then gain employment. He had done a 3-month practicum earlier in a school system that had smartboard technology, but the school that he was assigned to did not have that. And at this point in time, it was too late for him to be reassigned to a different school because all the slots were filled up. So we really had to go in here and do and find the appropriate accommodations to make sure that he was successful in graduating on time. The VR counselor was watching TV one day, and she saw either a show or an advertisement with somebody using a standing wheelchair, and she felt that this was probably the accommodation the client needed, because she felt that it solved two problems. One was that if the client was in a standing position, he could write on the board in the classroom while teaching, and because he was also going to be teaching physics, that he could supervise lab experiments in a standing position. So a DME vendor went and did an evaluation and recommended the Permobil C500 chair, which has a sit to stand feature. Now this accommodation cost over $40,000. If I recall correctly, it was probably closer to $45,000. But once again, with vocational rehab, cost is not the criteria. It is the appropriate accommodation that is needed for the client. So April Evans, who's the occupational therapist on the team, went to see the client. And so during her AT evaluation, the client revealed some additional information. Though he had used smartboard in the school that he had done his 3-month practicum, he reported that it was a really difficult phase for him because he had a lot of difficulty writing on the board. This is because he has limited flexion in his shoulders. And as you see on the graphic on the bottom left, the normal range of motion for shoulder flexion is 180 degrees. But as you could see from the green line that's indicated there, the client could only raise his elbow to 100 degrees. And on the picture on the right, you could see him, in maximum flexion writing on the board. But what you also need to realize that in order to get that kind of an shoulder flexion, he was trying to compensate by arching his back. And he's a gentleman of small stature, and so he could only reach at the halfway point of the board. And he used crutches. So this was pretty difficult for him to do during his 3-month practicum. This is from a different angle that actually shows how much the back arches when he's trying to write. One thing that the client also mentioned to April that he was going to a pain clinic and also undergoing physical therapy for his back pain and pain in his both upper and lower extremities. The client also said that he had a terrible time doing papers or typing up papers for school because he said that he could only type at 20 words per minute, which April felt was actually a generous overestimate, and she felt that he was actually typing much slower. So the client, Chris Moon, was actually spending long hours at night trying to type up his reports because he was very slow at doing so. April Evans, the OT, she arranged for a DME vendor to bring a power chair with an elevating seat to see if that could work for the client. And as you could see in this picture, he's still arching his back, and at maximum flexion, it's really not the ideal position for him to be doing anything all day long. So the chair did not really address the client's needs. And if anything else, there was an additional barrier because the chair was blocking the view of the students. So anytime Chris was writing something on the board, unless he got out of the way, the students could not see what he was writing. But April felt that there was some merits for using the power chair with an elevating option because this allowed Chris to see the students in the back row, and also for him to supervise the labs in the experiments in the physics lab. And also when he was doing his practicum, he needed help with someone to get supplies and also make copies. So the power chair gave him the option to be independent in doing some of those chores. So when it came to teaching and lecturing in the classroom, April looked at getting a tablet PC with a stylus and a projector so that he could sit in his chair and teach, and whatever he's writing on the tablet is projected onto the screen. The tablet PC had to be lightweight and durable, and of course she wanted to make sure that the right software was loaded on the laptop so that or the tablet, so that the client could make the appropriate notes that were projected onto the screen. But equally important was the features of the projector. It had to be lightweight, but because Chris was going to be a math teacher, we wanted to make sure that there was no distortion when the image was projected onto the screen. So as an example, what you see to the left is an equilateral triangle which has 3 sides equal and 3 angles equal. But if the image projected is distorted, it's no longer an equilateral triangle. So having a widescreen option would negate that distortion. And of course, if the projector had a wireless option, that would allow for it to be more portable too. So that's Chris, simulating writing on a tablet PC, and you could see that he's in a more neutral position compared to writing standing and writing in front of a board. And we of course had to get him a lap tray for the tablet. The recommendation that April made for the PC tablet was the Lenovo tablet PC, and this one is military grade and is very durable, which came in handy because Chris dropped it on the very first day, and only thing that was there was a little scratch. The digitizer pen was the stylus of choice, and April recommended the Epson Powerlight 1735W printer. and the W is the widescreen option. And the software that Chris used was Microsoft Office Note. And April also recommended Dragon Naturally Speaking for Chris to do his reports in school. So overall, the cost of all these accommodations were a little over $10,000. And if you recall that the cost of the power chair was almost $45,000. So not only was these recommendations that April made something that addressed all the client's needs, but from a vocational rehab funding point and standpoint, we saved $30,000 to $35,000 on this case because the right accommodations were put in place. And this case was served in 2011. So before I came here to record this webinar, I asked April if she would do something differently in 2015. And April said that she would have recommended an iPad with an auto box and maybe a couple of math apps. So this is just to show that, we can still do this today with some current technology. The fourth case is a low vision case. And this was a lady who worked as an administrative assistant. And I think there were a couple of office locations that she had to go to. A lot of her work required her to read printed material. And in both the office locations, she had to go to multiple office spaces to access, to talk to different people and look at paperwork. We got her, well, she had a smartphone, a Nokia smartphone, and we got her a KNFB reader app, which most of you know is an app that allows you to take a picture of a printed document, and the OCR converts the text to speech. This would have worked fine except for the fact that the client had a lot of difficulty in taking the image of the paper that she was going to take a picture of, because she kept consistently holding it too close to the document, which meant that she was only taking partial images. And so she had to take multiple pictures before she got the entire document in one snap. So as an accommodation, and Bill Barnes was the rehab engineer on this case, he felt that it was best to design a jig that was lightweight and portable that the client could use, and that would let her take pictures at a consistent distance, so she's getting it right the first time. So this is the design that he came up with. It had to be lightweight and portable because she would go to multiple locations and different offices, and it could serve the purpose of grabbing the image in one shot. And as you could see, the distance was calibrated so that when you take an image, a letter-sized picture document could be captured. So Bill designed this by himself, and he wanted to make sure that that one of the design features included an audible click. So when the client opened the jig, the click would let her know that it is in the right position for her to take a picture. And of course, as you can tell by this image, it was designed to fit a letter-sized paper or smaller. And this is just a different, this is an image of the finished product, and this is the same device in its folded position, so you could carry it like a briefcase or put it in a little bag and take it with you, so it's pretty portable. So the client could also take it home, and if she goes to a restaurant, she could read the menu too. Before I came here, I looked online because I started seeing during my different visits to different conferences, people were talking about their own little modifications, and I just found this online. A couple of DIY jigs on the top two images. The one on the bottom right is it's called the scan box, and the nice thing about this one is that you can connect a 9-volt battery, and it has LED lighting so that it illuminates the paper in the bottom. The one to the bottom left is something that a very, very, very good friend of mine, Dr. Therese Wilcombe from the University of Hampshire, showed me in one of the trainings that I attended. That costs like less than maybe 15 cents. And you can go online and get some more information about the way she has a how to do it document posted online. And if any of you haven't seen or attended Dr. Wilcombe's presentations, I would highly recommend you to do that. She is a a fantastic practitioner of assistive technology and solutions. The last case I'm going to discuss with you today is also a low vision case. This was a lady who was employed by a very large greeting card manufacturer who had a space in the aisle of a supermarket, a grocery store. And the bottom left image is is typical of a greeting card section that you could find at any of the stores. So her responsibilities were primarily to make sure that the cards were stocked. So daily she would do a count and make sure that the cards were in stock. Also, there are some seasonal cards like Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, and graduations. So she had to make sure that the aisle was well stocked with whatever the season was. And as you can tell from the image, these cards are placed in a grid. So there are rows and columns. So each card has a position number. It's an alphanumeric number. So what the client would do is she would pick up a card that needed to be stocked, and she would scan the barcode with a handheld scanner, and she would get an audio visual feedback with the number on the display and the position number read out to her. So she knew what was the exact location where the card needed to be. There were a couple of issues with this because she was relatively slow at her work, and we needed to, she needed to work faster. The first thing was that she would put all the greeting cards that needed to be stored in the grocery cart and would walk down the aisle. It was in a very low position, and she could, because of her low vision, she could not see the cards properly. So she had to bend down and reach it and bring it closer to her. There was time delay, and it was also not ergonomically a good way to do things because there was a lot of bending involved and extending of the hands. The other problem was that there were labels that indicated the position number of the cards on the shelf, and these were very tiny labels stuck to the side, and as you could see, the hand pointing out to a little label to the side. So again, she had to bend and tilt her head and squint and really struggle to see what the number markings were. So it was not in an ideal position. So these were the two things that we had to address. The first solution was pretty simple. The rehab technologist Gigi Taylor recommended to the store manager to come up with large font, high contrast labels that could be stuck in the very front instead of the side, so that was easy for everybody to see. And Gigi also estimated that the client had no problems reading font size that was approximately a thumb size, nail size. So that's one of the recommendations she made. And then she also had to look for a better way for the client to take the car to transport the cards down the aisle. So she went to the back of the store and picked up some boxes and did some rapid fabrication on the spot to come up with some potential solutions. And when she felt, that, so one thing that I also failed to mention was not only did she had to transport to take cards and store and put them on the aisle, but also there were gift wrapping tubes that she had to restock. So the design had to incorporate carrying cards and also these rolls of gift wrapping paper. So after she came up with some design options, she called in the rehab engineer, and once again it was Bill Barnes who worked on this case. So as a design criteria, we had to make sure that the tray that was being designed fit, matched the contours of the grocery store cart. And most of us are familiar with these cards, and most of the designs have of these cards have a taper in the front end, so it's actually more of a trapezoidal shape. And we wanted to make sure it matched those contours or the perimeter because it would maximize the storage area. Speaking of storage, the other thing that we had to look at when designing this tray was that there was a storage bin at the bottom of the aisle. You see on the top edge of that image there, those are the greeting cards, and below there's a 4-foot long cavity, which was where we wanted to store the tray when not in use. So we had to incorporate that the storage as a part of the design. So Bill came up with some schematics while designing this the tray for the cards, and one of the things that we had to make sure that it was lightweight, and Bill chose to use Gator foam, which is a high density foam board, as the material of choice. And you could see that it has been designed to in a trapezoidal shape so that it fits the grocery cart. And there are these hooks, and I think he used plywood to or MDF to reinforce it, but these hooks on both sides allow for the tray to be held in the grocery cart. The other thing he wanted to make sure was that it did not interfere with any advertisement placards that were a part of the grocery store cart. And he made sure that there was the design incorporated a cavity, and the because she had to also stock gift wrapping rolls, this is where they would sit, be positioned in the grocery cart. And because it had a tapering design, it was easy for the client to know which was the front end and which was the back end, because they were two different sizes. And as far as storage, Bill had to come up with a design where the tray itself could be folded in half, which would allow for storage of the tray in that 4-foot long bin at the bottom of the gift card aisle. And the way he designed this was to is that when you fold the tray, I guess it's inside out, it bends into half, and they're actually interlocking meshes. So when you fold this out, these slide into each other and form the tray. So as you see in this picture, this is the final product. The tray is actually folded in half, and the size matches the dimensions of the storage cabin, so it could be easily stored in that cavity. And when you fold this back into position, it forms it becomes the tray that you see in the grocery cart. So this allowed for the client to place it, the cards and the gift wrappers in the cart, and it was much more easier for her to use it because it was closer to her, and she could view the cards without much difficulty. The project itself cost only $30, and once again it was Gator foam board that was used in this project. So those are the 5 case studies that I had for you. I hope you guys learned something about what we do in Georgia in trying to come up with unique solutions to match the needs of our clients. And on the screen you see my email information and also my cell phone number. I'll be more than happy to respond to any questions that you have regarding not only these cases, but how we do business in Georgia Work Rehab with respect to assistive technology. And you're more than welcome to call me on my phone too. Once again, thank you very much for participating in this webinar and listening to me. And I also like to thank the Virginia Commonwealth University's Rehabilitation Research and Training Center for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.